Welcome back, and we're getting stuck straight into our first P of the 4 Ps, which is that of point. So if you remember, we were exploring point, plan, so building up the rest of the structure, props, about visual aids, personality is about us. So I'm going to take a scenario. Let's imagine for a moment that you receive a phone call today saying, hello, can you come and make a presentation to us next week? And you, not being quite in your right mind at the time, go, sure, I'd love to. I can't wait. So we're going to go through these as the order of preparation now. Having hung up that phone, the first thing we're going to think about is that of, well, what's the point of the exercise? Why am I there? What's the message? Then we're going to think about, as the next step of the preparation process, how will I plan the rest of the structure? How will I then create my visual aids to support me? And finally, how am I going to bring it to life with my personality? So that's the order of preparation that we're going through. So we've hung up the phone and we are faced with a dilemma at this point in time. And the dilemma is best graphically represented like so. Here is our dilemma. Years in art school. Look at that magnificent work of art. Okay, these dots are representing your head. That is all the information that's going around in your head at any given point in time. And our brain explodes at the time of preparing for a presentation with all the potential content we could include. So the examples and the methodology and the process and the cost-benefit analysis and so all the numbers and all the stats and all the facts and everything we could include. And it's a problem that gets worse as the days and as the years go by, because we've always got more information. Each day we're a wealth of new knowledge and new information that we could add to this. So the question is very rarely, boy, how am I going to pad it out to 10 minutes? The question is far more likely to be, how in the world am I going to get it down to 30? So we need a way to decide and to pick and to choose what information stays and what information goes, because you're not going to be able to include it all, unfortunately. I'm going to assume for the sake of this exercise that you know your subject matter, and that's why you've been asked to speak on the subject, yeah? So I'm going to assume that you are reasonably across the subject. Sometimes you're brand new to a job and you're asked to present, and clearly you need to go away and do some research under those circumstances. But for the most part, you've been asked to speak because you are the expert and you're the one who's most closely involved with this. We need to know our subject matter before we start preparing, but there's something else that we need to know about, and that is the audience. We need to know about who we are speaking to, and that will help us decide what's going to be, out of all that content, most relevant for them, most useful for them, and what isn't going to be so necessary. So that's going to be a big deciding factor around editing this content. So I'm going to, let's run through a little bit about what we need to know about the audience and how we find out that information. And we're going to go straight on then to crafting the actual message for that audience. So let's think about what we need to know about them. There's some obvious things that we need to be aware of before we can possibly start putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. We need to know things like who's going to be there, so who are the people in the audience and how many are there, and how diverse are they? So what different roles and functions do we have in the audience? Which parts of the organisation are they from? Are they from a client organisation, or, you know, is this an internal presentation? What's their level of knowledge on this subject? There may be some basics that you can leave out altogether. So what's their level of knowledge? What are they using this information for? Why are they there? What decision are they making based on this information, or what action do they need to make based on this information? So from their point of view, what's the usefulness of this information? It's also helpful to know things like what pressures are going on in their world at the moment, what challenges are they facing, what are they focused on, what are their KPIs, what are their measures, what are they really needing to achieve at the moment. What's their biggest concern? What's keeping them awake at night? The more detail you can get about who they are and what's going on for them, the more targeted and relevant and powerful and effective your presentation will be, and the more confident you will feel, because you know that you're hitting the mark, because you know where the mark is. So quite often we feel like we're floundering in a presentation because we're talking broadly and we have no idea really where we're going to end up or where we need to end up. I worked with a woman one time who was very senior in her role in an insurance organisation, and I went in to consult with her on an upcoming industry presentation. It was a big deal, and I said to her at the beginning of the meeting, the conversation, I said to her, okay, so can you explain to me a little bit about who's going to be there? And she said, oh, I don't really know that. I should probably find that out. And she jotted it down. And I said, do you know how many are going to be there? And she said, oh, I don't know that either. I think I should find that out. I said, do you know what the kind of the theme is? I know what your topic is, but do you know what the theme of the kind of conference is and where you fit within the other speakers and what those speakers are speaking about? Oh no, but that'd be a useful thing to find out. And we went on like this. And I must have spent 10 or 15 minutes just asking her questions about the audience and the environment and the setup. And by the time we got to the end of that 10 or 15 minutes, she said, oh, you know what, if I find the answers to these questions, I'm going to be fine. I won't really need your help. Thank you very much. And that was it. That's all she needed. So if we can find out the answers to some of these questions, it can make us feel so much better about knowing that we are really on track with the material that we've got and that it's genuinely useful and relevant. That in itself is a huge sigh of relief. How do we find out the answer to some of these questions? In her case, of course, she was able to go to the conference organiser. That's not always relevant for us, but we can look, if it's external, of course, we can Google them or look at their website and learn a bit about them that way. If it's internal or external with a client who we haven't worked with before, maybe we can chat with some colleagues who have worked with them. If it's often it's relevant to go straight to the horse's mouth and send them an email or make a phone call or even set up a pre-presentation meeting and call them and say, hey, I'm coming out to make a presentation to you next week. I'm planning to cover this, this and this, but I'd really like to get a sense of what's going on for you at the moment and where you stand on this issue and what concerns you may have around it. And are you already open to this idea, or is this going to be quite challenging for some of the people in the group, do you think? So having a face-to-face or sending them an email with 2 or 3 questions or making a quick phone call can go a long way to helping you feel much clearer and more confident about who you're going to be speaking to and therefore how you're going to target your material. So let's assume therefore now that we know our stuff and we know our audience. So having done that little bit of extra research, we're feeling much calmer and clearer about what our target is. The next step is starting to put pen to paper. Know our subject, know our audience, we need to start planning. To do that, there's a little formula we're going to follow, and I'm going to firstly introduce you to a presentation planning template, and that's going to serve as our template that we're going to be referring back to throughout this series. And then we're going to talk about where this final message or point, although I've just given it away, fits within the template and how we construct it. So our template looks like this. This is our presentation planner. And the way it's going to work is from a preparation point of view, the process works bottom up. We're going to start with the end in mind and get clear about that bottom line message or point. So that's going to go in number 1 down here, point, and we're going to work our way up the structure from a preparation point of view. Preparation will be from the bottom up, whereas of course when it comes time to talk it through on the day, you're going to start at the beginning and you're going to finish at the end. So delivery is going to be top down. So we're starting with the end in mind. We're going to get clear about what's the bottom line point or message for this audience now that we know who they are. And there's a 3-step formula that we have for putting together that final point. And so this is a really good time to start taking notes and thinking about your own upcoming meetings and presentations. There's some materials on the website that you may or may not have already come across or downloaded with this template and with some worksheets around this one sentence message structure. So let's start working our way through it. Here's our ABC formula for coming up with that one sentence message. The A stands for action. And what we're doing here in this final message is we are defining, and we're ultimately going to say to the audience, what it is we want them to either think or do as a result of this material or as a result of this presentation today. So mostly we're asking people to do something, endorse something, support something, implement something, choose something, make a decision, give us resources, give us money, choose us. So there's a lot of actions we're asking people to take, and I would suggest that's probably something like 80% of the time we're asking people to do something. There are some scenarios where you're not asking someone to do something, but you want them to think something and be very specific about what you want them to think. Don't make it broad brush, I want you to understand what we do in our department. That's too broad. If you're going to talk about your department cross-functionally, then be specific about the thought you want to leave us with. We do this in order to achieve this for the organisation. Yeah? So be very specific and very clear. If you are having a work in progress meeting, and let's say you are all business development managers and you're each going to update about your own territory and you're updating about yours, you're not asking them to do anything about it, but you do want them to think something very specific, which is not just, oh, I did this and I did that and this is what's going on with this client and this is what's going on over there. You want them overall to think that things are on track or things are off track, but we've hit some glitches and we've overcome them, or we're in the process of overcoming them. What's the overriding one ultimate thought you want them to walk away with out of your content today? We are always, however, asking people to think or to do something. Otherwise, of course, the question is, why are we there? Because I'll quite often have someone say to me, oh no, this is just for information. And I would say, look, if I just want information, I'll watch a David Attenborough documentary on the mating habits of jellyfish. So we don't really just need information for the sake of information. We need to work out what is it that they need and why do they need it. And if there is no clear purpose and if you're still coming up against, oh, I'm just talking because I'm talking, then I would push back and ask, why are you making this presentation, and can you go back to whoever's asked you to do it and say, this seems like a waste of your time and mine. Unless you can go, so you can be like the difficult kind of 4-year-old maybe who's doing the, but why? Go back to your organiser, because people are notoriously bad at giving us briefs. They'll come to us and say, oh, can you come and talk to me about your department? And you have the right, and I would suggest the responsibility, to go back to them and go, sure, why? Oh, because we just want to know about what you do. Why? Oh, because we're interacting with you all the time. Well, what specifically do you need to know? Well, we want to know how we interact with you better around this, because we're finding double. Now we're getting something. Now you're getting a more specific brief, and now you're going to get somewhere that helps to guide you around, okay, well, if that's what they really need, then I really want to talk about, this is what I want them to think about us, or this is what I want them to do when they're interacting with us to help us all work together more effectively. So it's suddenly becoming much more tangible. All right, so we're asking them to think or to do something, but nobody's going to think or do anything unless there's something in it for me. What is the overriding benefit to them in thinking or doing what you're suggesting? Is it going to make them money, save them time? Will it make them look good? Will it make them feel good? Is it going to make them feel more secure? Is it going to reduce a risk of some sort? Why are we there? So what's the overriding benefit to them in doing so? And or the consequence they will avoid by doing so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the answers to both of these questions. So if this is answer number 1 and answer number 2, we're going to put both of these together. We're going to take both of those answers and mould them. This is now just a wordsmithing exercise. to create a clear, concise, and compelling final conclusion. So what that's going to look like is something like this. Guys, if we take this action, then we will achieve this benefit. Or avoid this consequence. Or it could be the other way around. Guys, if we want to avoid this consequence, maybe it's a compliance issue, or if we want to achieve this benefit, then I recommend we take this action. So that's it. It's often a kind of if-then kind of statement, although it doesn't have to be specifically in those words, but it can often take on that flavour. If we implement this continuous improvement process, we will increase our project success rate tenfold, or to 100% or to 90% or something like that. So very specific, very clear. If it is a compliance issue, if we want to avoid being audited, then I recommend we stick within the guidelines. So we want to create a one-sentence message so that it's quite succinct and quite clear, not so succinct that it's generic and meaningless. You don't want, please implement this idea because it's good. Not really powerful, not really compelling. You want to be more specific than that, so it's going to have to be a little bit wordier, but not crazy amount. So we really want to try and get it to one sentence that's very direct. We're being overt, not covert, about what it is we want these people to do and why. So I don't know if you've ever been to a meeting, I know I certainly have, where you've walked out of there and gone, I'm not sure what the point was for me out of all of that, at the end of all of that. In fact, I don't even know why I was invited. So we don't want you to fall into that same trap. We want people to come into your meetings, know that there's always going to be a relevant, pertinent, meaningful message for them, and that's going to be because you craft it that way. This takes a little bit more effort than just standing up and talking about the stuff that you know all day, every day. I get to work with extremely experienced, knowledgeable, articulate, confident people. And what I invariably find is that they can speak really clearly and confidently and effectively in their presentation, and I'm still left wondering at the end what was the point. And when I push them on this in a workshop and I go, okay, well, what was the point? And do I really what did you want me to do, and what was the overriding benefit? There'll be a kind of slightly blank or slightly ashamed or embarrassed look as people kind of say, yeah, no, it's nowhere near as clear as it should have been. And then we do this process and they write a sentence. And I'll say to them, did you get that across this morning in your presentation? Was that message clear? And they'll happily admit, no, it wasn't there, because I was so caught up in the detail. I was so caught up in all my knowledge. So what they were busy doing was, let's find them, downloading dots. So they were data dumping. And as a result, my old boss used to talk about this as a crime of passion. We're all very close to our material. We know our stuff inside out and back to front. And so what we need to do when it comes time to present is the challenge is to objectify that and go, hang on a moment, do they really need all of this? And really, what's the point? What's the message? So, if you take one thing out of this entire series, I would really ask of you, it takes a little bit more effort up front. It takes a bit more kind of mental effort than just data dumping. I talk of that as being the kind of the verbal vomit. People, like the collective nouns, a pride of lions, a school of fish, a vomit of information. So what we want to do is make sure that by knowing our subject and knowing our audience, we are able to follow this formula to come up with a one-sentence message that is going to become our true north. And that's going to direct our process in a planning sense, and it's also going to help us to feel much more focused and directed when it comes time to delivery, whilst also giving the audience something genuinely meaningful and tangible to take out. Let's finish up there for this video. Next video, we're going to move on to the rest of that plan, and we're going to look at how we build up the rest of this process. The next 2 steps are going to be tackled in this next video. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Cheers for now.